Eric Sprott, Rick Rule, and Keith Neumeier are three successful resource investors coming together for one simple reason: to buy cheap assets from distressed companies and seize this once-in-a-decade opportunity to buy gold, silver, and other mineral projects for pennies on the dollar. First Mining Finance Corp., trading on the TSX Venture under FF, a recently launched venture with the sole purpose to acquire advanced stage natural resource projects, and starting on day one with 18 projects. Management has already identified over 60 additional projects to acquire. Learn more about First Mining Finance at futuremoneytrends/investright.
Hello everyone, and welcome to crushthestreet.com. I'm here with Steve Sutton. He's the Vice President of Development at the Leadership Institute. And prior to joining the Leadership Institute, Steve Sutton was the Chief of Staff in the House of Representatives for more than 14 years, and he's also managed numerous political campaigns from City Council to U.S. Congress, specializing in challenger campaigns. Today, I want to kind of talk about a conference I was at. I was at a Young Americans for Liberty event at UCLA, and Steve was the speaker at this event, and it was a great event. He had a lot of behind-the-scenes knowledge of what was going on at and during political campaigns, and I just wanted to have him on and discuss some of the things that we were discussing. Steve, thanks for joining me today.
Kenneth, thanks for having me.
Steve, so maybe you could just introduce yourself a little bit to the audience and tell us how you ended up at a libertarian conference.
Well, sure. My background is engineering, not politics. I went to the Naval Academy and graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering. But my final tour was in Washington, D.C. at the Pentagon. And that's when I developed an interest in politics and policy, because various books on investments that I was reading at the time encouraged the reader to keep their eye on those rascally politicians, because what might be a good investment today can be turned upside down by passing retroactive laws or future laws that would damage your investment because they would change the tax treatment or other depreciations on property or what have you. So that shook me awake to politics and policy, and so I started getting, I started looking into that. And what I found scared me as an investor and someone looking to the future. Thought it's very difficult to plan for the future when the rules can be changed so arbitrarily by political whims of the day. So I was determined to get involved in campaigns on the theory that if you elect good people, then you don't have to worry about them and the laws. That's proven to be false, but that was my theory. And so I started getting involved in campaigns and politics rather than the policy side. I figure if you elect sound, philosophically sound people, you can go back to your what is hopefully a productive life, and you don't have to watch them every day. And so I worked on campaigns, learned how to do that, helped get some good people elected, and returned to engineering, quite frankly. But then I realized that those who campaign as conservatives sometimes do not govern as conservatives. And so I made a career change. I got back into the politics full time, and the path led me to Capitol Hill as a chief of staff for 4 different freshman Republican members of Congress. And I would start up their offices and hire the staff and help them get reelected and then move on to the next one. So I did that for 14 years and worked with 4 different members, all on the Republican side, but of varying degrees of liberal, moderate, conservative. So then about 8 years ago, I left Capitol Hill and I came to the Leadership Institute as the vice president of programs initially. We have 44 training programs at the Leadership Institute. But several years into that, the president, Morton Blackwell of the Leadership Institute, asked me to move over to development, which is our fundraising. And now I do that. So I'm raising the money to help the Leadership Institute keep the lights on and do training around the country for conservative students and activists. And that's what brought me to the Young Americans for Liberty conference. I was invited to speak on campaigns and politics.
When it comes to politics and the government, have you seen it slowly deteriorate? Is the system, like you kind of mentioned, when people get in there and they try to do programs and help the population, would you say that over time it slowly deteriorates and democracy, the way it is, just slowly degenerates because it's constantly voting in bigger and bigger government, and people don't want their benefits taken away over time? And will it eventually lead to just a government bubble? I know that's more of an extreme question, but I'm just curious. What's your opinion on the behind the scenes of what's going on with the bigger picture?
I think it's a great question. Not really an extreme question. It's a central question to the future. Having been on the inside for 14 years on Capitol Hill, I don't want to be too cynical, but at some level, it's worse than you think. Even someone who means to do well, as you posited in your question, over time they get worn down by the left. At the typical congressional office, a congressman will take a meeting with a constituent or a lobbyist or both, and those are perfectly legitimate. But they'll take a meeting when they first start out, it's every 30 minutes, maybe every 20 minutes. And then as they get seniority, it's every 15 minutes. And with a committee chairman, it's every 10 minutes. They've got another person coming in and they tell them, get to the point. You got 10 minutes. And this goes on for hours. And everyone who comes into the office, virtually everyone, wants something. I used to call them the gimme, gimme, gimme caucuses. They just come in, and it's always something. Even conservatives often want something. Certainly business people want something. Special tax treatment for their industry, for their company. It's astonishing. And because it's a human trait to want to be liked, and it's especially acute amongst politicians who want to be liked, it wears them down. And over time, it takes a lot of fortitude to tell people, no, I'm not going to introduce legislation to earmark $1 million for your pet project. It's kind of a risk-reward ratio, to put it in financial or business terms, or I guess those are terms for any decision that you make. And often the risk-reward ratio overwhelmingly favors helping people out in your district. There's no downside to helping them, other than the future of the financial markets and the value of the dollar, but that's all in the future. So it's immediate gratification versus long term. And the solution to that, to bring you back from the abyss of cynicism that's might take you, is leadership. It takes strong leadership at the presidential level, and also within the Senate and the House, to lead the members. And if you don't have that, then you should be scared. If you do have that, then I think you should be optimistic. And sadly, with the current administration and the current leadership in the House, I'm an equal opportunity critic, there's less leadership than there needs to be to address the problems the country has in a mature way that can solve them. I think the problems are extremely solvable. But on the Hill, there's politics and there's policy. Now, they overlap, but they are distinct. And the difficulty is we could sit and decide this would be great policy. Why don't they pass this? Something that's obvious often is held hostage for the not so obvious. And so something that, if they put it on to a vote, would pass overwhelmingly, is held by the leadership so they can attach something that's less popular to it. And so in order for things to pass, the policy and the politics have to match up. There has to be a moment in time when the two things overlap. You saw this happen when President Clinton finally voted for welfare reform. He vetoed it twice before. And then he claims they changed the bill, so I liked it. No, the political pressure became too great. And he was told, you've got to sign this thing because your numbers are crashing, your poll numbers. And so they changed puppy to small dog, and they put a comma here or took a comma out there, and suddenly it was a different bill, and the president signed it. So we got pretty good legislation. That was a pretty good bill with work requirements and school requirements or exemptions for work, and led to a decrease of about a third in the welfare rolls without throwing people on the streets starving. So, but the politics had to be right for the policy to be implemented. And sadly, that's a rare moment in time.
You mentioned the words maturity, and I kind of wanted to ask you something. I was kind of thinking of it while I was at the conference, and I'm thinking about the ignorant voter, the immediate gratification that you mentioned, and that seems to be a lot of the liberal policies out there, the universal health care, the rights for different minority groups or different things like that just kind of please the surface level voter. And it seems like the liberal policies seem to be very palatable for the ignorant voter. Now, I know there are people out there who are very smart who would classify themselves as liberals, but let me take that a step further. Maybe someone who's a little more educated across the board might fall into a more conservative camp when it comes to fiscal ideas, monetary ideas. But to take that even further and go into maybe a fiscally libertarian mindset, I would think it takes even more education, more knowledge to understand what goes on behind that. And a lot of these ideas, they're not very palatable to someone who is just a casual voter. And one of the things you talked about is that 10% of the population basically decides who's going to win and the direction of the country. And it's a very discouraging thing for someone like myself who might spend a lot of time on this and then have to deal with wherever the ignorance in the country wants to go, and that's where the politics and the discussions need to sit on. And for me, it's kind of very discouraging. So I'm curious, is there a way to combat this based on your experience?
Great question again. Sure there is. It's difficult because rather than left versus right, smart versus ignorant, if you will, or even mature, it is more mature versus immature. It's the difference between the short term and the long term, self-gratification or looking into the future and planning. Let's take the financial markets. Again, you can spend your paycheck every time you get it, and you can live better than you would live if you saved your money. But at some point, you have to grow up, and you have to think of the future. And it's interesting that people who marry and have children are overwhelmingly more conservative. And I think it's because they grow up. It's not a self-selection thing. I think they learn. I think they change their minds. Back in the 60s, it was predicted that once the flower children were of voting age, that this country would be drastically altered because of their experience. And then once they started having children, they would pass those habits on to the children and those thoughts and those values. What happened, in fact, we ended up with Ronald Reagan in the 80s. How did that happen? Well, there were many a parent who grew up in the 60s who had a conversation with their children. Yeah, that's what I did when I was at your age, but I'll be damned if you're going to do it. And so there was kind of a growing up, if you will, and a maturity. And we teach our children to delay gratification, plan for the future. Not to excess, but certainly there will become a time and day whether you're setting aside 5%, 10% of your income. Some people recommend 15%. Live below your ability to that extent. Live within your means. When you get a raise, you should not increase your lifestyle. You should take the raise, and you can increase the lifestyle a little, but you should put that towards savings. You get an income tax return. That should go toward retirement. Those are the kinds of lessons we teach our children, or we learn on our own, that will lead to a more stable future. Sadly, politicians don't think like that. They are into the immediate and delayed gratification and pander to voters who are ready to accept those things. So again, it takes leadership. It takes a leader to explain patiently why that's not in our country's or in the individual special interests' best interest long term. And you just have to. It takes time. It's difficult. It's difficult to do in a political campaign, because in a campaign you've got adversaries. It's an adversarial situation. But in the off year, that's the job that we should be engaged in. Slowly but surely and persistently, educating people into the long-term trends and why there is a bubble. There is a government. I like that phrase, Kenneth, that there's a government bubble, because I think there is one, and we're all going to pay the price. And the interesting thing, it will hurt the middle class and poor much more than it will hurt the rich. When you've got $20 million, you end up with only $5 million. Well, yeah, it hurts. You have to sell the second house, and you can't vacation as often to your favorite foreign country. But you still have $5 million. It will, and so all these things to penalize the rich. It's worse than foolish. I think it's really a bad idea. So,
yeah, or the rich are just tied into the system so much that they can benefit from it. But I wanted to actually move on to something, and sure. It's the thought that for every dollar a man makes, women make only 75%. And you mentioned something that...
Do you think that's true?
Well, I was going to ask you that. Is the war on women that America has, is this something that is true or something that was made up for votes? It's former Congressman Dick Armey used to have a phrase. He's from Texas. He would have these colorful phrases. And he would say, the war on women is like a Texas steer. It has a couple of good points at the front, but in between is a whole lot of bull. And that's what the argument, many of the arguments on the left, and sometimes on the right as well, it has a couple of valid points, but there's much that's not true. I think the Washington Post did a study recently. They have their Pinocchio test, where they test, they take things that people have said, and they give it 1 to 4 Pinocchios, depending on how bad it is. President Obama's "If you want your doctor, you can keep your doctor," period, earned 4 Pinocchios and was considered the lie of the decade, or certainly the lie of the year, the year that they did that. But the war on women they've done analysis on this. I mean, I would encourage people to read the pieces that have been done debunking this. It's just not true. The other thing about equal pay for equal work, a committee of people determine that if your education to get to where you are is more than the education of someone else, you should make more money. So they will say a nurse should make more than a truck driver, and they will consider that equal pay for equal work. When we say equal pay for equal work, we think it's the same job that you're doing. A female truck driver should make it the same as a male truck driver. That's not what the left means when they say equal pay for equal work. They define equal work in ways that get the statistic of 75%. We would all say if a woman wants to make as much as a male truck driver, she should become a truck driver. And then if she's making less, there's a valid point. But often they're not. But when a nurse makes less than a truck driver, but the nurse had to do 4 years of school and the truck driver did not, therefore she is not making equal pay on the work. So that 75%, it's not 100%. It's not a complete lie, but the 75% is just, it's ridiculous. And there are many studies out there that debunk it. I think George Will has done an excellent article on it, and it's fairly easily debunked. But the left came up with the war on women as a umbrella issue, and then they have all the subsets from pay equity to contraception in the health care bill to a number of other issues.
And they're very clever the way they package things and put conservatives on defense.
Exactly. It's this idea that if you're not supporting this, you're unkind, you aren't caring, you don't care about women, and it puts the conservative on the side of having to defend something that isn't even true. And again, that goes back to having to deal with the ignorant voter, having to go back and say, hey, no, you need to look into this situation a little more. It's not just this simple, America hates women, vote for me so we can fix this. And again, now that I talk about it, I get frustrated with the whole system. But
keep in mind, Kenneth, just to jump in the midst of the war on women, Republicans, conservative, won the biggest electoral victory in 2014 that the country had seen in 100 years. So while the left is clever and the press publicizes their point of view with a double standard, American people can figure out most of this stuff. I just think we should be smarter about helping them to understand, but they get it often. Even if the leadership sometimes doesn't. So we should be of good cheer. I like to say I'm a long-range pessimist, but I'm a short-term optimist. And I think with some of the pathologies in this country, I don't see how we survive as the free nation that we've been. On the other hand, my window from day-to-day optimist has been extended to 6 to 12-month optimist because just recently, we had a pretty big victory, and we need to press that and then build on that. The left understands that governing is politics by different means. Too often on the right, we don't understand that. We do politics during campaign season, and then we want to manage and do government. You can't separate the two. You shouldn't separate the two. And President Obama very much understands that, which is why he's politics all the time. I think he overdoes it and is not as subtle as he should be, but that's what he does. Everything he does is politics. If you want to know what he's going to do next on policy, understand his politics first, and it will tell you exactly what he's going to do. I mean, I predicted 3 years ago that he will never approve the Keystone Pipeline because politically it would be very damaging to him with his base, which at the time is all he had left. Now, he could surprise me in his final days and approve it, but I would just be shocked. The politics don't make sense. The policy makes sense. In fact, if you're an environmentalist, you would want the Keystone Pipeline because the alternatives will damage the environment even more as they truck the oil sands to without pipelines to be shipped overseas to China, where the environmental regulations are a lot worse for burning coal or burning oil. And so, if you're a true environmentalist and you look at the two choices, let's do the pipeline. But that's not what's going on. It's not policy. That's why we get frustrated as conservatives, as libertarians, as lovers of liberty, because we see the policy so clearly, and we're like, why can't people see this? Well, you have to understand the politics behind it before you get to that point.
I'm going to ask this question for someone I know who spent $1,000 at a Ron Paul dinner a week before he announced his resignation from running for president. You mentioned sometimes candidates are just in it for the movement itself. Would you say Ron Paul was in it for just the movement? And was he successful?
Another great question. I wouldn't quite phrase it as, quote, just the movement, because I think the movement's important. There are different reasons for running for political office. We all think it's to win, but it's not. Sometimes it's to build your organization, your infrastructure, for a purpose. Now, if you're building it for selfish reasons, then that's one thing. I do not think Ron Paul was doing that. I think he truly is dedicated, and he's building a movement. He was once asked, actually, by a reporter, okay, you wake up after the election and you find yourself in the Oval Office. What's the first thing that you would do? And he looks at her like she's crazy and says, the first thing I would do is ask, how did that happen? I don't think he had any thought of winning, and I don't think if he really cared if he won. He was winning by building a movement, and that movement survives now, and it's in many ways stronger than the larger establishment Republican Party in many places in the country. That's astonishing, and it's a real tribute to what he did. Now, conversely, I think Rand Paul is running to win, but that's why you see him kind of hedging on some foreign policy and on some social issues, perhaps, and that's the balancing act he's going to have to figure out if where he wants to go with that, because he may moderate positions for the majority and upset his base in the process. But that's, again, it's a big country, and to get to 53%, it's hard to do with any group of true believers.
Yeah. I was actually at a Ron Paul campaign event at UCLA when he was running, and I was blown away by the enthusiasm and the amount of people that were there. And I know he didn't get the media coverage that he probably deserved for how much people truly did love him. But is it possible, and based on your experience, that there was any sort of voter manipulation, fraud to discredit him and maybe help some of the other candidates?
I don't think it would have been fraud. I think it's overt. I think they're very open about it. I don't think they need to be fraudulent about it. Certainly, there is fraud that goes on in America, but relatively little, I think. Particularly on our side. We raise our children to follow the rules for the most part and respect authority, and so I don't think there's that much fraud. Having said that, clearly the establishment doesn't like them, and as the Ron Paul organizations and supporters have dedicated themselves to the Republican Party, at least for now. They have made inroads into taking over local parties, and the establishment doesn't like that. So there's a battle that's going on, but I think it's pretty open. I don't think there's a lot of, there's some behind-the-scenes rules changes that people make to make it more difficult for their opposition, but even that's in the open. I don't think there's.
What about the ballots that are counted? Any evidence supporting fraud going on with the ballots being counted in favor of someone else?
Well, sure, here and there, I suppose, but to do it to an extent to really impact an election would have to be so rampant. That's the problem with most conspiracy theories. Not that this would be a conspiracy theory. I think we have to pay attention to it, but is for them to have the impact that had to be done on such a large scale, like landing on the moon was a fraud. So there are hundreds of NASA scientists who have never said a word to this day because they're keeping. I just don't see that happening. 9/11 was an inside job. It's I don't know. I think some of that stuff's pretty far-fetched. Is there fraud in voting in America? There absolutely is, and there are documented cases, despite what the mainstream media would say about there not being. There are. But on a scale to impact elections, I don't think so.
Well, Steve, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. If people want to reach out to you or learn more about what you do or your organization in general, where would they go and what would they find?
Well, they can go to our website, which is leadershipinstitute.org, and just check out all the different, the 44 training programs that we have. They range from half a day to 4 days, so they're more seminars or workshops, and they can check out all the things on that site. And my bio is on there, and they can contact me directly if they would like to, and I'll do my best to return their call and answer their questions and help them out, and we'll go from there.
Well, that's great, Steve. Thank you for taking the time with me.
Okay, Kenneth, thanks for having me.